your smartphone. Now, welcome to the world of design, hocus pocus busters. Thank you. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
What I'm referring you to now is a little bit my experience in the interview, right? There's a reason why I mentioned that. Is some people are very, very critical about what is going on in the design thinking world, right? And say, hey, this is hocus pocus here, and I am on a mission. I will tell everyone off if you don't have the definition straight, right? If you think of design thinking that can solve world hunger, it cannot, right? Unless you apply it in a certain way, and you speak of it in a very defined and precise way. Right? I want to show you an example from my LinkedIn newsfeed. Right, so I'm obviously in the design world. You have many interesting articles, and the other day I came across this one. It was on my feed, newsfeed: service design in the public sector, new ways of thinking and doing. Right, I thought, oh yeah, interesting. I was clicking on it. Right, I liked it. Right, I took some information out of it, but then a couple of days later, it showed up in my newsfeed again. But not because it was newly posted, but because someone commented on it. And this person is GK van Patter. GK van Patter is on a mission, right? And actually, I don't know if you know Humanific, but Humanific is actually a consultancy based in New York, and they do really cool work, right? So don't get me wrong, right? I don't want to criticize what they do, but they are very sensible to what people say about design thinking, and they are mixing up certain things. And the first time I read this, I was totally smashed. I was like, hey, listen, I've dealt with design thinking now for 3 years, and I still don't understand what you say, right? I was reading this, and totally puzzling was the last part, right? As methodology, service design, what this article was about, is downstream and assumption box. It is useful in contexts where someone has already defined what the challenge actually are, or the challenges actually are. This is not always what the ambitious folks selling service design have in mind. Schwada. Right? I was like, oh my God, what is this? And then, kindly enough, right, Mr. von Patter has then linked his articles there, right, which are an interesting read. Right, so if you have time, I would browse through it.
Yeah, you could clarify maybe service design is more popular in Europe and design thinking in America?
Well, for him, it's a completely different thing. And Jose, this is exactly it, right? I did not understand until I read his article, Mind the Methodology Gap. Right?
Okay.
So, and in this article, actually, he was naming, calling out the elephant in the room. Right? And the elephant in the room for him is that people mistakenly speak of design thinking as a philosophy when they mean a methodology. A bit like what you have said, right? It gives you a certain method somehow, right? Exactly. But then others want to, like Thales, right? Big disruptive innovation. You have this, well, it's not possible to have if you don't branch out, if you don't reframe, right? If you already start with an idea of what the solution is. Right? And that is, in a nutshell, what he's saying in this article. And the language that he's using is actually downstream and upstream. Right? That is what he meant there in his comment. So when you use design thinking as a methodology, this is downstream. Downstream in a sense that it's assumption-based, and you already have a solution in form of a product, of a service, right? And you want actually just to guide the discussion into a certain direction already. So it's product, service, or experience opportunity challenge, and the pursuit is to actually develop capacity in terms of these predefined solutions. On the other hand, he contrasts this as design thinking as an upstream method with an open aperture method. Right? Meaning nothing else than he says when you conduct design thinking as a philosophy, you start from a different point, right? You have not a predefined notion of what you actually want. You don't know even what the problem is, right? So he's actually stressing this first part of design thinking, which engages at a completely different part. So he's saying that, well, you start by defuzz a fuzzy situation in an opportunity challenge, right? So you have this design brief, and actually you don't know yet what the product is, so what the problem is. You have to dive into it for a couple of days to actually identify the right problem that you want to choose, right? And he then says, also there's another user centricity here, but not the user who's actually using the product or whatever you design, but you as a designer. At the beginning I told you, like my favorite book, yeah, from Melissa, that's exactly what this is about, right? How can you be the designer who designs solutions for others, right? What kind of mindsets do you need for that? What kind of understanding of design thinking do you need to be that? So, and the pursuit here, according to Van Detter, is the pursuit of organizational adaptive capacity building. So it's more than just providing solutions for others, it's professional development for yourself, right? In a corporate world, if you want to say so. Let me give you a concrete example. This is all a little bit abstract, right? And it took me really a while what he meant. But from my own experience at NASA, you will know this example. But when you look at Stanford University, right? Stanford University has actually a course which they call Design for Extreme Affordability, right? So what they do is actually they look at products and services and think of, hey, can this be made cheaper, right? Or can we make it more affordable for social classes which don't have the money but should enjoy the technology, right? Something like that. So one of the problems that they tackled, or the themes that they got, was child mortality in Nepal. And that was somewhere in 2013, 14, when the class took place, right? So we are standing more or less here at that part. So you had actually a mortality rate of 21 of 1,000, I think, yeah, exactly, of each 1,000, right? And you had then Stanford University or Stanford Medicine working together with the government in Nepal, which said, hey, listen, we know what the problem is, right? So they said, we have incubators, which are very, very expensive. You have a course which is designed for affordability, right? So why can't you come with your students and look at this incubator and make it cheaper? They cost $50,000 US. How cheap can you make them? Right? So what they then actually did is they said, yes, that's a great challenge. They came and had a look at the incubators, right? But what they found out is, it's not the incubators actually. They came to the hospital and what did they find? Nothing. The incubators were empty, right? And they were then asking, how can this be, right? And they looked at actually what was the cause of the problem. So before they started building a solution, they were asking, what's the problem here? And the problem actually was that people living in the villages had no time to come with their preborn baby to the hospital, right? And an hour's ride in, well, best case scenario.
Question?
It's a bit confusing where the door is. Can I join?
Yes, of course.
Of course.
Jump in.
Jump in?
Yes, jump in.
So what you have here is actually then the travel, right, was a problem. It was not the incubator. Actually, the $50,000 US expensive incubators were all empty, not used, right? So if they have just designed another incubator cheaper, they would not have solved the problem at all. So what they have done is actually they have done interviews with these, with these villages, right? And have asked, what is the problem? And they came bit by bit, iterative round after iterative round, for solutions, or two solutions, which then included or ended in a sleeping bag for babies, which has some warming packs at the back, right? So that for an hour or two, you can keep your preborn baby warm enough to get to the hospital. Right? The hospital itself was furious. Right? They said, no, this is not what we actually told you to do. Right? We wanted you to give us a cheaper incubator, right? Because of money savings, right? This is what they had. No, and they came up for a problem which tackled, or for a solution which tackled a much bigger problem.
I'm sorry, Kai, why was the hospital furious? Like, why? Because?
Well, because it was not in the design brief, right? We told you to design this cheaper, right? And this is expensive, and the hospital wanted to have more,
right?
Obviously, I mean, and for cheaper money,
right?
But They came and said, yeah, we have the solution for you. And then imagine they came up with this. Right? And you're like, no, this is not an incubator. This is a sleeping bag. I didn't ask you, right, for that. But this is the example of what a found pattern means, right? When you think design as a philosophy, right? This is where you come up with disruptive innovation. This is where you need actually this open mindset to reframe the problem statement. Right? And that allows you then to come up with really cool solutions that no one really thought of before.
It could be an issue, for industries. I get the approach in the end we're user-centric, not customer-centric. That's why I disregarded the initial brief of the hospital. But in the end, in some cases it's very applicable. Some others, who's paying the bill? If the customer is
right. Exactly. It's a very good point. I mean, the good thing about Stanford, they didn't care. Right?
Yeah.
And actually, students, this is a real product. When you Google it, you can, I forgot the name of it. Nasser, do you remember the name?
I think it's just a plastic bag with hot water.
No, I think it's a bit more. But I think when you Google it, somehow you can find it, right? And it's really, they have made a business out of it. So in the end, the students made a business, right? And this is why I'm a bit skeptical also what comes at, well, at Stanford University is great, right? Don't get me wrong. But this project is for me a little bit of post-colonialism here, right? We have the solution and then we take it from you and then we sell it to you again. Talking about Stanford University, right? So we had said this before, IDEO Stanford. I mean, they're very, well, Palo Alto and where the IDEO original office is very close, right? So there's a very tight connection between these two. But then, yeah, you have this very famous pattern here of emphasize, define, ideate, prototype, and test, right? What Stanford University does. This is how, at the methodology, right? You can always explain design thinking very easily, and especially my students loved it. Right? When I told them this is a method to innovation, oh yeah, great, can I take notes? Yeah, oh, great, first I do this, then. Obviously it's not like that. But it's a very helpful methodology, right, or way to explain it at the beginning. Then the British Design Council in 2005 has also developed an idea of design thinking, or what it is, right? Mentally speaking, they then often speak about this double diamond shape, right, or double diamond structure, where they say, okay, you will have the phases here of discovery, define, develop, and deliver. And what you do here then is actually well, I've described this in the next one, yeah. You have two processes here where you then flare out and you focus, and you flare out and you focus, right? And the linking point is actually where you define then the challenge. Right? So what you do, actually, at the beginning, when you do the empathy work, right, you just don't want a solution yet, right? You don't talk about solutions for an entire day or two. You talk about, okay, what's the problem? What could be a problem, right? Let's understand the situation, right? Understand and observe is very important. Then you put it together to define the problem, right? This is where the how might we question comes in, right? Where you find the how might we question. Right? And the aim, and you will know yourself, right? It's very tricky to come up with a good how might we question, right? You have to balance again what is a good how might we question, right? How narrow can I be, or how broad should I go, and how do I keep it human-centered, right? So the human needs to feature somehow in here as well. So when you look then at what the D School at Stanford actually does, they don't teach the pattern. Everyone thinks you teach the pattern, right? But no, they don't. What Stanford does, they teach 8 design thinking abilities. So they think of design thinking as something that is based on 8 abilities that they teach their students. So on the one hand, you have tangible abilities. And if you want to read up for it, the sources Carissa Carter and Scott Doley. Scott Doley is also the guy who has written the book Space, which is really cool as well. Where they say, okay, the tangible ones is to synthesize information, to learn from others, to build and craft intentionally, and to experiment rapidly. Right? So these are the learning outcomes in all their courses that you find. And what you also have is that the intangibles, move between concrete and abstract, communicate deliberately, right? Visual communication is a big thing there. Design your design work, apply design thinking, Jose, what you said, right? Apply design thinking to your own book, please, right? Do this. And navigate ambiguity, right? Be comfortable with, I don't have a solution yet, I don't understand. I know less than when I started, right? Especially at the beginning. You get really puzzled. And to get comfortable with this, right? Saying, yeah, I enjoyed it a little bit more. Let's do another exercise, right? So that I really don't know a thing. This is what at Cepheid they say, yeah, that's cool, that's great. And then actually then they bring in artists and dancer, and then you dance for a little bit, right? And then you get really like in a completely different mood, and then you tackle it, right? Then you start to narrow it down. It's very nice, actually. So, us now bringing it a little bit back together, right? What does it mean? On the one hand, you find literature that treats design thinking as a methodology, right? And there, this literature, it's often like a workshop facilitation, right? Where it really is about the process, right? How can I guide you through it quickly in 5 days, right? And I promise you results. Jake Knapp, right? And his design sprint. Again, great, fantastic. Yeah? What he says then, it's important there that you ask questions, write stuff down, and mind the clock, right? And he says the facilitator is there to make sure the sprint happens and to provide the framework so that everyone else can succeed, right? So you are at service of the others. You're not interfering with the process as such, with the thinking. It's all to the people who do this. You are just facilitating the process, right? And make sure that it happens. On the other hand, when you look at design thinking as a philosophy, right? You actually want to work with the people, right? You have learning outcomes for the people who actually attend your workshop, right? You look at, okay, how can I develop them, right? Make sure your participants learn new skills and abilities, like Stanford has pointed these 8 out, right? So you prepare the participants to face challenges of today's world, and you really want to make them better. So it's about improving the people who design, not only about creating a great design. And yeah, as an example here, right, I had the sprint. I think I brought it as well. It's a great book, right? It's fantastic, really. It's a great, I like the enlightening exercise. I've done this with Elodie the other day at the assembly at In5 Tech, worked fantastically, right? Really the separation of when you do brainstorming, of really not criticizing, works perfectly every time again. Yeah, a great resource to have. Other great, I call it playbooks, right, that give you ideas for the methodologies. As I've shown at the beginning, 101 design methods, which actually gives you well, also a kind of a navigator for your process. The design thinking playbook, which is specifically interesting for digital transformation, right, if you're interested in that one. And then obviously, Jose, as we said, service design, like in Europe, right? These are the guys from the Design Thinking Academy in Amsterdam and London. Fantastic. If you have the chance to take one of their courses, whoop, whoop, right? It's gold standard, I would say. For service design.
I met the guy.
Oh, did you?
And he said, this is not a book to use, it's just a book to have in the shelf.
Well, I mean, this is service design doing, right? They have 2 books, I think.
That was the previous one. Yeah.
And then this is service design doing, right? So you have service design for the bookshelf and service design doing for the methodology.
That's the one.
Right? Maybe after your conversation, you started writing this book. Okay. Oh yeah. Now let me entertain you with a little break and a little video that I have for you, right? And I want you. Yeah.
I was searching.
Oh, no worries.
Come in, join. Have a seat.
I have a video for you, and unfortunately it doesn't work because I don't have the internet. But I have it on my laptop as well. You know, living in the UAE, you always have a plan B. And C and D.
Be prepared.
So I like it because it's funny in a way of, it showcases you what happens if you don't consider design thinking as a philosophy, right? If it's only a methodology for you, right? And it will only bring you so far, and even if you have cool solutions, they will not.
You say this is an advertisement. Is that what you're saying?
This is an advertisement?
For design thinking.
Well, kind of. Well, for design thinking as a philosophy, I would say, right? So if you are in that corner, people think, oh, design thinking is like JK pattern here, like no, open aperture and upstream, right? That is the real design thinking. You will like this a lot.
That's so weird.
Okay, right? I mean, that is sometimes, especially when you work in innovation, right? When you come up with new ideas and people have old concepts in mind, right? Have not done this mindset change. I mean, that probably is very familiar to you. And this will lead me actually to the last part of my presentation, where, yeah, great. I'll talk a little bit about mindsets, skills, skill sets, and methods, right? So when you talk about design thinking, that these are the three different things, I think, that you can focus on whatever your predominance or whatever your focus in your design activity is. The three, for me, master concepts that underline the design thinking process, when you look at it as a philosophy, are actually the growth mindset, or the mindsets in general, like growth mindset and fixed mindset, from Carol Dweck. Then obviously creative confidence, right? The understanding here is being not only having a good idea, but knowing to put it into practice. Right? That's very important here. And Roger Martin's opposable mind, often also referred to as integrative thinking. And I think this is very important. What to do, not only, especially when you have the formulation of your how might we question, right? My students always go like, yeah, fantastic, how might we save the world, right? It doesn't help anyone, right? So you need to get some tension in there, right? And the opposable mind helps you actually to hold two opposing ideas at the same time in mind and develop a solution, right? Having both in mind. Just quickly, right? I took these three, there are others as well, right? But there's about system thinking is very important, I think. Visual thinking is very important as well for the process, right? But I just give you three master mindsets here now. The first one, the growth mindset. And I don't know, are you familiar with that? Carol Dweck's theory? Yeah?
No.
Exactly. I think it's...
I'm not familiar. Could you explain it?
No? Okay, have a look here. What you normally have is, right, the parting idea is, Jose, is intelligence, is it something that you have or that you can grow, right? And that is the starting point of the growth or the fixed mindset. When you think that intelligence is something that you have, every question that I ask you, what is design thinking, right? Let's see if she can answer, right? Let's see if she's intelligent. Right? Showcases me where you stand. And everything that I ask you is a test. Right? While when you think intelligence is something that you can build up, that you learn, right? Where you can improve in iterative modes, then actually it's something that, oh, that's fun, right? Let me learn a little bit, right? Let's see what comes out of it. And if I'm wrong, okay, I'm wrong, but at least I know now better. Right? I'm not ignored. So the idea here is that you deal with life situations, like general challenges, obstacles, efforts, criticism, and success and failure differently. Right? With a fixed mindset, failure is failure. With a growth mindset, failure is much better than success. Right? Obviously, you take it to the extreme, right? Where people say, yeah, we want to fail. Yeah, great, we have failed, right? And you see these videos online celebrating failure, right? And people get actually money or something for failing early in a corporation. The idea behind is you don't want to fail. You want to fail early and you want to learn from it. If you do this, that is better, right? Or in general, HR strategy is you incentivize action, right, in terms of success or failure. It doesn't matter. The only thing that you penalize is inactivity. Right? That is well, put it in another way. However, you need to be very careful. Carol Dweck says, I mean, who thinks he has a growth, or he or she has a growth mindset? 3, 4, yeah? Try to, exactly, right? So again, when you think you have it or not, this is fixed mindset. Exactly, right? So don't fall into this, oh yeah, I have it or not. No, I mean, there are situations where I definitely have it, right? Situation where I'm under stress, it's difficult for me, right, to showcase my growth mindset. And that is exactly what Carol Dweck says, right? So have a look and try to improve, right? Learn from situations. That's great, that's fine. And this is exactly what you do in design thinking, right? You have this iterative process, you do the prototyping. You don't do the prototyping to showcase my students. I love them, right? But sometimes they're just like, Doctor, do you see a great prototype? Right? It's fantastic. I will put it into my car, whether I actually at home, right? And I will showcase it everywhere. Right? For what? Yeah, it's great, isn't it? I don't know. You tell me. And they don't understand that in prototyping you learn twice. With a growth mindset, you learn while doing it, right? And you learn from the feedback of what you get when you show it to people. Every time you have a prototype, you show it, right? And people say like, yeah, that's nice. Neat. No, it's not. People are just nice, right? To you. But when you give it to someone and say, whoa, can I buy it? Great. Where is it available? Yeah, then you have it somehow, right? Things like that. Creative confidence, right? As I said, and in this book, well, these two books actually are very good in two different senses, right? Tina Selig's Crash Course on Creativity is actually the most efficient source for me in terms of understanding what creativity is and how I can elicit it with my students, right? She has exercises there. She explains the theory. It's fantastic. It's a gold mine. Creative confidence of the Kelly brothers, right, from Stanford and IDEO, is good in terms of it has a couple of methods in there, right, and it explains how in practice in the early days you have used these methods to boost creativity. I don't know. Do you know this 30 circles exercise? Right? You get 30 circles, and you have to fill them with anything, right? And you have only a certain time frame, and then you see what people do, right? And so this is an exercise you will find in that book. So it's good, right? It's especially when you teach beginners, that's a great resource, right? But for you to understand again as a philosophy, Tina Selig, she's really good. So the behaviors, right? So what I try to do is then to get from these books behaviors that you can then transform into skill sets. So the behaviors that you would then elicit from engineers, for instance, is practice intentionality, right? So you not only try to do something, you try to do something very specific and you test it. Reframe the problem, as we just had the example of in Nepal, right, with the incubator. And a bias towards action, right? Everything is better than just sitting around, right? No, do something, right? Let's do it, let's prototype, let's test, let's ask another question, right? But not relax it down like you know. And then my favorite, integrative thinking, as I've said before, right? It's actually, well, the first book is The Opposable Mind, that's the basics, basically. And it's written alone by Roger Martin. Roger Martin was the dean of the Rotman School of Business in Toronto for a long, long time. He's not there anymore. But he has used design thinking for business problems, right? So he was one of the first that really applied design thinking to problems that big corporations have, right? So he is a bit of a counterpart to IDEO for me. Then, a couple of years later, he actually put a practical book to the theory outlined in The Opposable Mind, which is creating great choices. And one of the first conversations that I had with Jose, I actually pitched him the idea from that book that actually says, okay, an opposable mind, right, is that you have two solutions or two different solutions in mind at the same time, right? Let's take the example from, well, my background is politics, right? Let's take the topic of power, right? How can I make you do what I want you to do, right? Well, somehow, how can I make you buy a product or something like that?
Got it.
So you would look at, okay, one way is I can force you. The other way is I can seduce you. Or convince you. Well, the third one maybe in there, right? Somehow, right? Exactly. So what you would do is, what you would see in creating great choices is that, well, which one would you choose? Soft power or hard power? Who would take soft power? It's a lie. Who would take hard power? Yeah.
No one.
Well, this book will teach you, no, neither, right? You are not an either-or person, you want both, right? And how do you do this? How do you get both? And one of the techniques there that he showcases you is a positive list. So you look at the spectrum, right, of any problem, you take the opposing ideas, right, like in our case, soft power and hard power, and you do, well, you know, a plus-minus list, right? You do for the extreme only the positives. You take from soft power the positives, and you take from hard power the positives. And then you put them together, and then your solution needs to incorporate as many of those aspects as possible. And that is how you create great choices. In a nutshell, right? Obviously,
Right,
I don't do justice to that book, which is a great read. It's very nice. Other texts for mindsets, as I said, right? There's thinking in systems. I think especially when you design, when you tackle social problems, system thinking is super important. It's a bit like I always compare it to driving in Dubai, right? You think you need to go left, right? Or you want to go left, and no, but you have to turn right, right? System thinking is often the same, right? You don't understand why your policies don't work, but it's just, it needs time, right? Or it's just aspects of it that in a system work differently. Network thinking, beyond Brockhaus thinking, is actually about that we have to get rid of the silos. Right? Especially in academia, Ulrich Weinberg is the head of the HDI, the Hasso-Plattner Institute of Design Thinking in Potsdam. And he has said, no, we have to get rid of in university these different categories. No, we need projects, right? Nowadays, it's so complex that we cannot have this anymore. We need a multifunctional team, and yeah, this is how we should learn as well. As I said at the beginning, this is human! My favorite, not really about self-discovery, right? I attended Jose's last workshop. I met so many life coaches there. I did not know that this is such a famous activity or profession here, right? But for any life coach who wants, I think this is human, you can learn a lot there, right? A lot of discovery and methodologies also for you to apply the right mindsets. Ikigai! Again, this is thanks to Jose that is in there. I thought, oh my god, Ikigai. Jose would not stop talking about it. Right? So I was, okay, good. And then now you go to Kinokuniya and you have many different, Ikigai books there. Right, I browsed through them and said, okay, good, let's get that one. Looked most convincing. And discover the Japanese secrets to a long and happy life. Right?
Who's the author?
Who's the get this in 12 weeks.
Who's the author of this one?
What is that?
Who's the author?
It's De Sunant.
Sunant.
It's over there. You can have a look.
Read it.
Oh, just another. No, it's really good. It's really good. and it has a lot of advice really for you to get a little bit more relaxed, right? And then things that I also can see as an underlying for design mentalities, right? How you approach, and you've seen the design abilities at Stanford, like navigating complexity, right? Or being okay with ambiguity. Ikigai. That is Ikigai, right? It's very, very much relevant to this. And then another one, which is a bit more theoretical, which is in over our heads, the mental demands of modern life, from Robert Keegan. It's actually, he is a constructive developmentalist, so he's a psychologist, right? And what he says is super relevant, especially when you think design thinking is a philosophy, right? Because what he is saying is that there are two things. On the one hand, society has a hidden curriculum and demands that we have to fulfill. If we are not up to par, we will not succeed in society, on one hand, right? So that is the first thing. So he discovered there's a hidden curriculum in society. The second thing that he has found out is that we are developing in stages of our meaning-making capacity. And you might have seen this in yourself when watching a movie 15 years after you have seen it the first time, right? My example is, The Life of Brian. You know The Life of Brian? Mm-hmm. Yeah? I thought when I was like, I think I saw it the first time when I was like 10, 11 years old, right? My parents didn't want me to watch it, right? Oh my God, no, you can't, right? Monty Python, oh my God, no. So I was watching it, for them, right? They wanted me to be a banker, remember, right? So this mindset. And so The Life of Brian, I watched it, I found it hilarious, right? So really, literally 20 years later, I watched this movie again. I've never seen it again, right? And I'm still on the floor, but for totally different reasons, right? I now really understand it, right? I found when I was a teenager, just 10 years, 11 years old, I found it hilarious for many different reasons, right? I understood that the first joke at the beginning, like 6 o'clock, 10 past the Sportschau, right, in Germany was, like the football summary, basically, right? I found this hilarious. But now there were totally different things that I found, oh my God, this is brilliant, this is genius. Right? Because my meaning-making capacity has actually reached a different stage. Right? And that is what he is saying in this book. You can't tackle societal problems if you don't think in systems, if you don't have the mentality of seeing that everything is connected, right? That you and me are the same, basically. And when I do in an ecosystem harm to you, indirectly I do harm to me. So in the reverse, we live in one ecosystem. I want you to be happy. I want you to prosper. Right? But in today's business world, how difficult is that to sell? Right? It's a survival of the fittest, right? So it's not. And so if it's a complex read, it's difficult, but it's really deep and meaningful for your design approach, right? When you apply design thinking techniques, and especially when you teach it. I've noticed it when I was at Stanford, right? We had this great course, NASA, right? I did everything, in Stanford everything was great, right? We had people for the interviews and the exercises. Oh my God! I did everything, I swear. Voila, as my students would say. I did everything the same in Wasserkeimer when I was teaching there. Nothing worked. My students looked at me like, doctor, I don't understand. I was like, oh my God, are you stupid? Am I not a good teacher? What is it? Right? Obviously, it's a first. No. And I was wondering, what was it? And it's this. Right? It's their meaning-making capacity. It's just different. It has nothing to do with their cognitive knowledge. It has to do with the way how they put things together, how they count 1 and 1 together. Right? To see that 1 and 1 not always is 2. Okay, and the last point I promise is I just showed another feature of design thinking, present unfinished work. Right? At the moment, I'm not teaching at university anymore, so I left it aside, but I thought, okay, for this presentation, I can show you what I have done. So as you have seen before, I have actually every mindset, right? I've actually analyzed and thought of, okay, what are behaviors that you want to see, right, as evidence of that mindset? So I've looked at behaviors, which you can then think of as skill sets, right, that people develop in your course. So that you have mindsets, skill sets, and methods that you use. And then I have put it actually on the design thinking phases, right? And then never mind which model you're using, right? If you just take a broad one, inspirational phase, ideation phase, implementation phase, or you take the Stanford model, right? Empathize, define, ideate, prototype, test. I just then have looked at it, I've taken the 3 mindsets. IT stands for integrative thinking, right? So on what I want to see of my students, when we are in the empathize phase, I want them to have an exercise where they showcase to me that they embrace complexity, right? In the understanding of a situation, I think that is very important not to think, oh yeah, it's only this. No, go bigger, reframe the problem, things like that. Prototyping, focus on intentionality, right? So for instance, when you want a certain feature, you want to test it, right? Put it in there. On a purpose, even if you think it will fail, put it in there, be intentional about what you prototype, and then see what comes out of it, right? It's a bit like the scientific method. Have a hypothesis, and then test the hypothesis, right? When you have a prototype, you need to know what you think will come out of it, right? If you just do a prototype, it's like, oh, let's see. Right? No, right? This is not effective, this is not efficient. This is design thinking hocus pocus, right? So, focus on intentionality. And again, there's a reason why Stanford has included this in their 8 abilities. And then, well, for instance, growth mindset, right, in the testing phase. Learn from criticism. I mean, it's so difficult, and anyone who tells me, oh no, I found criticism. Oh, not me, right? No. I stand above everything. That's not true, right? Especially when this is your baby, your prototype, right? You have worked on it, right? An entire week. You have pulled a nighter on that, right? You have delivered, and then they said, oh really? That's no, we can, in the West, we do it much better. No. Right? Learn from it. Then to ask the right questions. And, oh, that's interesting. Why do you think so? Right? That costs me so much. Yeah. Again, the books more or less, right? Philosophy to the left, methodologies to the right. Conclusion, if you want so. Right? So what you can take out from this evening, from this little talk, is on the one hand that design thinking is a process of thinking, hard work, yelling that goes into the decision that makes the artifact. Right? So for me, it's a process. If you ask me nowadays for my definition, for me this is really a process. Understand really the difference between the downstream and upstream methodology here, right? And you don't have to be like from pattern, right? That you really yell at people, that they mix it up, that they sell a service design approach as an upstream method, right? Which they're not, but that's fine. You know it, right? If you keep it separated, I think that will help you a lot in your day-to-day design work. Disruptive innovation builds up on a process that cultivates design skills, methods, and mindsets. I call it the double human-centric approach, right? So I think, yes, your design methodology should be user-centric, right? This is what we do in design for. But it needs to be user-centric on both sides, right? On the user actually and the designer. 3 master mindsets, growth mindset, creative confidence, and integrative thinking. Really, if you have some spare time, look into these, right? I think personally and professionally, we learn a lot from it, and identify behaviors to fit them into the design thinking process in form of stokes and appetizers and exercises. And as I said at the very, very beginning, what you often do, you have stokes, little exercises, right, from gamification of things. That is very easy and very nicely. And this is how you practice, or how I practice often in my workshops, the methods, the mindsets that I want, right, to get them warm into for instance, a brainstorming session. Right? I often do the yes and exercise. Do you know this? Yeah. Right? And you can feel it, right? You have them then say, organize a party. I always take. I don't know what you take. It's like yes, but. Vibrations really down. Right? When you come, yes and. Right? And they really get it. Obviously, I say overdo it, right, on purpose. But then later on, they really get it, and they go, oh, yes and. That is what you want. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Kai. Our debate overview, and now if you want to ask some questions to Kai about some book specifically, we'll have some mingling questions.
Thank you, Baba.
Awesome, great, thanks.
Great. Will you be willing to share this literature review with us?
Oh yeah, I will put it on. You always put it on SlideShare.
We
right?
will share it in the group, so we'll share the slides with you. Yeah, sure. Yes.
Definitely.
No question if I may ask you the group. Well, design and philosophy, I think, at least from my side, we've gotten that pretty well. Now the problem that I think it's a process of course, teaching, that it gets embedded into the thinking that you do, especially in a large enterprise. What we see as a problem now is that everybody knows it's important, so they want to cram it into one day. So what we see is that, you know, if we're asked, hey, we want to solve this problem, we want to design thinking workshop for one day, and we're going to bring 50 people in. And it's like, to me, that's the biggest threat, because then you have 50 people thinking they're experts at the end of the day, and that they're going to go do it somewhere else and just do it completely wrong. So now, in the sake of time and how precious time is, and people just can only spend one day to adopt a new philosophy, what do you see that works? Another, like from the design sprint, I think Jake has tried to do it in one-day workshops. Most of the time, he does the 1 week, of course, sprint. But how do you actually capture and like teach that in one day, or at least get to a point where people that had never learned about this or heard about it actually start to get in a different mindset? Or you think that's difficult?
Interesting.
Well, it's definitely a great challenge. Right? What I love, for instance, of the workshops at Stanford is that it was not only the workshop time that you were there, you already got something to prepare beforehand, right? And you had some aftercare. They actually called you up and said, hey, where do you stand with your project, right? You said, well, we agreed at the end of the workshop, but this is the takeaway message, this is what you wanted to do. Where do you stand? Where do you have difficulties, right? So pre and aftercare is probably something that you could do actually to help out, right? Because yeah, there's a tendency, right? It's so, and Jake also said this in his book, right? You can try it also in 4 days and then not have the entire team, but have parts of the team, right? And then coming in, and yeah, that is a huge problem, exactly. I don't have a solution for that. That is maybe one way of doing it. Another way of doing it is really have them take these mindset courses beforehand, or make sure that they have been exposed to these things, right? Send out videos, prepare them really for the workshop, so that you don't have to do this actively in the workshop itself. But as you've seen, like, when you look at this book, right, he's not saying, hey, teach the mindset, right? Look at the people and what they do. No, he said he has no time for that at all, right? So he needs good people already in there. The problem that I have here in the UAE often, right? I have people who are willing to learn, but who have not had this mindset exposure, right? So what I have to do really, and I think this is the fun part, right? You give me Stanford students and then go to Nepal and solve these solutions. Yeah, that's cool, but that's so cool, right? You give me people who are like average, I make them average, and then I solve these things, oh my God. This is a real turnaround, right? This is where they come and say, oh, you're the guru, right? You cannot only work with pros, but you turn people into pros, and then they deliver. I think that is what I would want to, and for that, one day.
Yeah, great question.
But yeah, I mean, I totally see your point. I hear you. Yeah.
My question is.
Speak up.
My question is half venting, half a question. In the company where I work, the senior management has kind of latched on to a growth mindset, very much in
You're on video.
inverted.
You're on video.
Inverted commas, but I don't really feel like it's proper growth mindset. You know, I think it's kind of they're talking about something else and just naming it growth mindset. So I've kind of taken it on myself to. We have learning time where I work in an education company, and we have learning time, and we can learn about personal stuff. So I'm kind of running a facilitation session on not necessarily just growth mindset, but how they can expand their minds. And the video that you showed about the mindsets and the cavemen, that really resonated with me. So I wanted to ask you if you have any one piece of advice for changing maybe set mindset. especially in a corporate setting.
Interesting.
Interesting
How to
question.
manage campus.
Yeah, pretty much.
You work well.
No, no. Anyone can help out, yeah?
No, it's the same question I have also. But sometimes I feel like, okay, senior management is always senior management, so they don't really listen to the people now. But even colleagues who's not actually doesn't have any design background or certain mindset that we talk today, it's kind of hard. I mean, it's not really easy to collaborate with them even. Because before that we have to, I don't know, I have so tight deadline and I don't have time to explain everything from the beginning and change their mindset and do this together.
Exactly. I don't have time. I can't do this, right? I will not complete my other things. Fear, right? that would be my answer to that, right? So what I see often is that I work in cultures of fear, right? I don't have enough time. Oh my God, I can't fail, right? I think if you ask me for one piece of advice, change that culture of fear into a culture of hope, right? Of positivity. And I think that is what you find often in Silicon Valley, right? People are happy and you want them to, at Google, to play, and you see that, I mean, you have it here, right? The table tennis in the youth. Come on, really? Did you understand why at Google they have table tennis right there? It's just, in a fear mind, well, in a fear atmosphere of fear, it's something that is not working. So I think if you would start in injecting somehow this hope element, right? So not this dominance of fear, that could help.
I faced that. I left corporate, but my suggestion to look into, just very practically, find a tribe of other people that are similar. Find the most senior person in the organization that you think has the same mentality. Bend their ear to sort of support you, even if it's a formal group, informal group, etc. Do projects on the side. Speak to people in the language that they understand. So I worked for a company that everyone thinks is really capitalist, but was actually a not-for-profit at the time. So people just wanted to make it the 30 years until they could retire. Like that was the mentality. And here, there were those of us who were like, yeah, let's grow, let's secret, and it was like not on, right? So we had to just deal with them like, okay, you're not going to get fired. Okay, can I get the numbers by 4:59 p.m. at the latest? Okay, and then I'll take it from there. Don't worry, I won't mention your name. We had to sort of negotiate based on where they were thinking. But the way I survived was just finding other people that thought the same way I did. And then we would go to the CEO. And then eventually the CEO came to us directly. I need this, I need that. Because he knew what the rest of the people were like. So just for your own sanity, I would say, see if you can, don't try to do it alone, if that's possible.
Yeah, it was a great piece of advice. Any other comments? That one?
All right, let's see with the hands.
Okay. I mean, as I said, right, if you want to have a look into the books, just feel free to browse through and ask. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.